Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the May 1st special school board workshop. We will call the meeting. We'll have the pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, roll call please.
Mrs. Walker.
Here.
Mrs. Beachy.
Here.
Mr. Bushy. Mr. McGann.
Yeah.
Mr. Gerhart. Mr. Linder. Here. Mr. Sensitive.
Great.
Here. Members present.
I'd like to make the announcement that we did have an executive session before this meeting for personnel. The May 1st, 2023 school board meeting is open to the public and also being streamed virtually. I need approval of tonight's agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Recognition of visitors and public content. Rochelle, you want to make a comment? Superintendent's report.
I have nothing to report, but I will turn the floor over to Mr. Howard at this time.
So the Sixers play at 7 o'clock, so I think 15 minutes ought to be. Get us covered here. Just starting in here, I apologize for the black and white. I'd love to say it was a cost-cutting measure on my part, but realized after they started ripping through that they were coming out black and white. So you'll have to look at the screen to see the colors.
We appreciate the cost cutting effort.
I was going to ride with that, but I figured like. So just kind of starting off here, where we're at current year. So with the current year, using our frontline Forecast 5 budget management analytics. Basically, that compares last year's expenses, this year's expenses. I do some tweaks and it calculates the forecast based on uploading the monthly information. Right now, we're at $698,202. There's some money that we had on our school-based access since the last forecast that we decided to draw down on. So that was over $400,000 on school-based access that we're bringing in. So that increased the revenue for the year to date. This sheet is basically kind of compares prior year to date versus the prior year actual and the current year to date and the annual budget. So if you kind of look at the expenses, I mean, what I would look at there is total expenditures through last year's period was $45,465,000, and we're at $49,315,000 this current year to date. Fund balance analysis here. If you look at this, this is just basically what we do here is we look at our beginning fund balance, for local revenue, state revenue, and then the expenditures, and kind of come to a net change in fund balance. And if you look there, the $698,204 And that's a little bit different. There's a little bit of rounding difference on the forecasting model versus what our books are actually. So that's why there's a couple dollar difference on that. That's in there. That would leave us with roughly $26 million fund balance, total fund balance. This year, you can see now, before I get started, I want to say I use 3.1% on these calculations. So the base index, if you recall, is 4.1. The models that I had been using before all represented 4.1%. Based on some numbers and the forecast for this year, I downgraded that to a 3.1 to run there. That doesn't mean that's what we need to decide moving forward. It's just what I used in the calculation. So that created a deficit, a small deficit of $350,000 right here. And if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see that the committed for future capital projects, the fund balance, I'm estimating at the end of 23-24 would be 5 million from 10 million currently. And that's because our intent is to use $500,000 should we pursue the athletic project. So we would be using the leftover roughly $4.5 to $5 million of leftover bond funds from the high school project, especially now that interest is being earned on those funds that are sitting. And then another up to $5 million of the committed for future capital projects, which would reduce our fund balance slightly. This is a budget history model, kind of going back to 2017, 18, moving forward. I'm not going to go through all these numbers here, but it's just another way of looking at it. The expenditures down below are by major object. So 100 salaries, 200 is benefits, 600 is like supplies and energy costs in there. The one thing I wanted to point out here is, so we've had, if the projected numbers come out the way they are and where the proposal goes through moving forward, we have 3 straight years of expenditures exceeding our revenues. Now that's okay in a short term, but in a long term, obviously that's not a sustainable model to continue to exceed new revenues with expenditures. So I just wanted to point that out. This is an area of concern that we have to keep an eye on. Again, we have some reserves set aside that we can use in the short term. And also, as I've said before, we planned to have a deficit forecast when we put some of these funds away. That way, we could get the millage in place that we needed to sustain the debt payments. This is a proposed budget at various millage rates. So I selected 4.1, 3.1%, 2.5%, and 1.5%. And you can see the projected deficit at each millage rate increase. Surplus deficit over time. So some of the newer board members might not have heard me say this, but I know some of the existing have been here for a little bit longer. The declining surplus. So we had a surplus and we were feeling pretty comfortable. We knew we had capital projects coming up. We knew some of our buildings were aging. And so there was a plan kind of surplus putting away into fund balance. But that surplus was declining as we were moving forward. So it was shrinking surplus. Basically meant we were moving towards a surplus to a break-even position. There's the trend line that I put over top of that. And you can see that the trend is coming down towards break-even, a zero budget. Looking at our revenue sources, so we're between 69% and 70% on local revenues. 3% on federal sources, and I'll say that's high because we have the ESSER money that was tied to the COVID relief funds. So that additional, normally our federal revenues are around $800,000. So that's higher and has been higher the last several years because of the ESSER funds. State sources, about 28%. Local revenue, I have down there in the corner, The proposed revenues from real estate taxes account for 82.08% of all local revenue sources. And the local revenue and 56.62% of all of our revenue. So the lion's share, over half of our revenue comes from real estate taxes alone. If you go to Western PA, that's a little bit different. They get higher state funding. So some of those numbers are actually flip-flopped where they have state funding that's 70% and local sources less, depending on what tax bases are. So in there, if you kind of look at it, earned income taxes, I kind of want to laser out right here. Normally, earned income taxes are a little hard because the last payment always kind of has extra funds in it. And what we're seeing this year is we're running about 5% below what Lancaster County projected for us on at the beginning of the year. We're not quite sure why. We're looking at it. It's unexpected. So we don't really think that surge at the end of the year is going to come from the EIT. I've been working with Lancaster County Tax Collection Bureau to try to get some taxpayer profiles to find out why we're running 5% below.
Have you looked any further? Because it looks like as a state, we're actually trending higher than that.
Yeah, and it could be, again, that's why I'm trying to get some demographics of our taxpayers to see what our age group of working taxpayers is. It also can be a large company that either dissolved or the owner retired or sold or something. So, we're a small enough area that a major company that's reduced their scope could impact our local revenue. Really nothing. Oh, the other notable thing is interest and dividends. So if you look back there in 21-22, we had actual $89,518. We were earning basically nothing on our money, which was frustrating. But if you look this year, we're trending towards, I think we're going to end around $1.4 million, and I have in there $1.6 million. I'm hoping that's a conservative number. I'm hoping I'm not hoping interest rates go up for a personal basis, but for a school district, it would be good because we issued all of our bonds at a lower interest rate when the interest rate was really low. And now those bond funds are kind of sitting there waiting to pay off the pay applications, earning this interest. So the interest rate going up has been really good for the school district as far as revenue. So this is the assessed value calculation and the millage rate growth. And I've talked before, and I have a chart a little further back regarding the millage rate decline. If I were to knock this back to 2010, maybe you'd see some years where we had 3 to 4% assessed value growth, which was basically a 4% tax increase before we even touched the millage rate for the taxpayers. There are some projects going on. I'm looking into them. I follow the planning sites and everything, trying to see when those are going to hit. The county's a little bit delayed. Properties, even though you might see them going up and people moving in, sometimes it can take 3 to 4 months before, or even 6 months before that hits our tax rolls. So I did request a new tax roll update. The gentleman that's responsible for that is on vacation. So good for him. So collection rate, I just want to point out when we talk about collection rate, what does that mean? So on the on this slide here, you'll see the calculation basically takes the assessed value times the millage rate divided by 1,000, makes an adjustment for homestead, farmstead, and then multiplies it by a collection rate. And you can see there it's 96% is what I'm using as the collection rate. So what does that mean? So when we build taxes at base, there's an opportunity for a discount. So taxpayers can take a discount if they pay in a certain time. So you take the taxes billed at base, you take away the discounts, and then you add back penalties that taxpayers have to pay as a result of paying late. And then there are uncollected amounts that we turn over to Lancaster County Tax Collection Bureau for them to collect on our behalf. So the difference in that becomes our collection rate. You can see in 22-23, we had a 96.4 collection rate. Now, I used to use 96.8. That number had come down. It dipped under 96 one year. I use 96 now. In the hopes maybe we beat 96%, but the difference there, as you can imagine, might kind of pan out in our delinquent tax collections. That's a line item on the local taxes as well. So the uncollected amount there goes to the county. They collect it for us. We'll get a portion of that. Sometimes it lags a year or two, but we eventually get paid. If they don't pay it when they sell the property, we get paid. So eventually we do get paid for uncollected. So just to kind of point out, and for the board here and also for community members, this is our history since the Act 1 index came into being. So when the law was passed and the Act 1 index came out, which set a maximum amount that we could raise millage rates by without exceptions. So you can see the blue line with the yellow PA keystones. That is where the Act 1 index was. The maroon line with the MC logo there is where we actually taxed that year. And the green line that intersects the two is the assessed value and the percentage change in assessed value. So you can see 3 times since it's been enacted, we've gone 0. And you can see the majority of the times we're under base index, especially back here when the assessed value was higher. And now, since we started doing our construction projects and our assessed value wasn't near as high, we've gone to index, but we've never exceeded index since that's been put into place. And again, you can see how often we've gone under index. This is the assessed value, somewhat of a concern for me. This is the recent history, but back in the 10 years prior to that, again, it was sometimes 3 to 5% growth in 1 year. So the trend is kind of downward. That number is not responding really well this year. Normally at this point, that number perks up a little bit. I don't know if the county's sitting on some properties that are yet to go in the tax rolls. That's why I requested a report today. When I get that, I'll get a better feel of where we're at and where that might land. I'm hoping it lands around 1%, but right now I have it forecasted at 0.75. It's actually somewhere around 0.5 right now. But I expect it, based on where we were in previous years, expect it to land around 0.75. So this is just something I point out. I'm not trying to make an editorial with this at all. It's just basically saying, when you make a tax decision in 1 year, it never just impacts that year. It's cumulative. So in this case, we did a 0 back in 2021. And bringing that 0 forward in each future year, you can see the impact on that individual budget year. So the first year we did it, we decided to forego $867,854 in revenue from real estate. Then the next year, when the millage rate increased, that was $910,692. In 25-26, if we stayed at index, it would be $1,806,000. Over that period of time, it would be $7.6 million. That was based on that 0% decision in 2021. And again, I'm not editorializing here. I'm just pointing out that when you make decisions regarding the millage rate, it impacts future years moving forward. That might be a little unfair. Here, if we went 3.1, that's the impact of that 3.1 decision in the next future years if we did the base index in the following years. Each year it just kind of grows a little bit. Obviously, that 2021 analysis was a little bit accentuated because it was a 0%. I like to point this out as well to our taxpayers and to the board. I've kind of grayed out the district name, but in my spreadsheet I have it. What I do is I track their millage rates and I calculate what property tax on a $350,000 home in each school district would be as far as taxes. And you can see we're 4th from the bottom down there and what it would cost a taxpayer in taxes on a $350,000 home. In fairness, we all have different levels of assessed value. So some of the people who are a little bit higher might have lower assessed value, so their move rate needs to run a little bit higher so they can generate more revenue. This is for the board to see the individual impact on a taxpayer, and I have different assessed values there. The yellow 198.2, that's our median assessed value. And I know most of you know there's a difference between assessed value and the actual market value of the home. So the assessed value is generally, the further away from reassessment you get, it's generally far less than the actual market value of the home. But the median assessed value is 198.2. And there you can see it, 1.5, that would be a $46 increase to the taxes. At 3.1, that would be a 9, which is what I currently have this budget calculated at. It would be a $96 increase annually for a taxpayer. If we went full 4.1, that's 127 for the median assessed value. State revenue, basically two types of state revenue. There's formula, so the basic ed funding formula and the special ed funding formula. That's based on a very complex formula, which I've gone through before, and sometime down the road I'll go through again sometime if anybody gets hungry for that information. It's kind of very, very confusing, but basically there's a formula that reimburses for basic ed and special ed. And then there are kind of reimbursements, what I'll say. So we spend money to service our debt for construction projects. There's if you look down there, the rental and sinking fund, PlanCon, that's a reimbursement for construction projects. That's no longer anymore, but we do have Barron Elementary, the middle school, and Doe Run Elementary are all PlanCon projects. So we're getting reimbursement every time we pay a payment on the bonds. High school is not a PlanCon reimbursed project. That was not available at the time we went to bid, so we weren't able to take advantage of PlanCon. And I don't know if that's ever going to come back, but at this point, at least we have 3 of our projects in there in the PlanCon pipeline. That's a little high this year. I noted that down there. That 894,000 isn't normal. If you look at the year prior, for whatever reason, the state didn't pay the year prior. I kept pushing and eventually we got paid for the year prior PlanCon reimbursement. So that was about $400,000 added on to that number. That's should have been in 21, 22, but the state didn't pay it in that year. So we'll be back to normal in 23, 24 on that. So if you look at that, total state sources, 19 million, a little over $19 million. Here's another example of a reimbursement, state share of retirement contribution. We also get a reimbursement for transportation, and we get a reimbursement for the state share of Social Security. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but right now the governor has a proposal out there that he wants to put $567 million into the special ed or the basic ed funding analysis, and that would yield an increase of $792,000 for us. I don't think we're going to get that. That's what they're saying. All the lobbyists and the state PASBO and everything, they're coming back and saying they don't think it's going to be that high. I put in around $500,000 because I think it's going to be funded at about that level. It could be less though. If it's less, if we find out it's less, I'll have to lower the revenue a little bit. Or if for whatever reason it's more, we could be looking at a higher number, which would be, 292,000 more over what I already budgeted. There's a lot of rhetoric out there. I don't know if you're following it. A lot of comments from some representatives saying funding schools isn't the thing. They need to be overhauled. They need to be fixed, that type of thing. So I don't know where we're going to sit on that at this point. And there's a good chance we won't know by the time we have to make a budget decision in June. So a lot of times the state doesn't have their budget finalized, so we have to kind of take a guess or kind of take a shot at where we think that's going to end up being funded. Right now, we have 0.1273, if I'm reading that right, of the state share percent of the total state. So what they do is they make a calculation, they adjust our enrollment numbers with certain factors, and then they compare that to the state's adjustments as well. So we get a pro rata of the total state number. That's good, because right now, if somebody said, hey, we're going to take that entire bucket and distribute it that way, we would actually be safe. We'd actually get more money than what we're currently getting. And it hasn't always been that way. In the past, if they would have gone to full formula, we would have lost money. And at one point, it was like $1 million swing for us. This time, we're on the good side of it. So if something should happen there, we would actually benefit from that. And just to go over some of the ADM adjustments. So an ADM is, so there's a difference between enrollment and ADM. So enrollment is the actual, you see on the board agenda, we always put an enrollment number in there. That's the actual bodies kind of moving through our school in the building. The ADM is actually all the numbers of the people we fund. So they might go to charter school, they might go somewhere else. That's who we're responsible for funding. So if somebody goes to cyber charter, we pay the cyber charter for that person, but it still adds on as an ADM because we're responsible financially for that. So I'm going through 4 weights here. So, and kind of just put something down there that the state put in there. So one of the surprising numbers was poverty weight for us. And I saw our numbers jumping up, but I wasn't quite sure. When I did some digging in, I noticed our poverty adjustments. So that would be, there's 3 levels of poverty. There's moderate, acute, and I can't remember what the other one, concentrated poverty. And it's all based on poverty levels set by the state and the federal government. And so those numbers have ticked up for us, which adds, so you start with our actual ADMs, and then these are additions onto the ADMs based on certain criteria. ELL is another one we jumped up as our English language learners increased. And the logic behind this in the formula is that students living in poverty and ELL learners require more resources. So a lot of times with an ELL learner, we need, we might have to have somebody specially working with that in our special education department. And so there's more resources and also the research, and I'm probably out of my league here as a financial guy. I'm looking around to the educators. With students living in poverty, they have a little bit more to overcome. And so there's more resources that the district needs to allocate. And so the state recognizes that. And in this formula, they make an adjustment for that. So on both of those criteria, we get upward adjustments. Charter school adjustment, you can imagine as we've experienced charter school growth, that adjustment has moved up. And school districts, I have there, school districts face stranded costs when students leave school districts. What that means is if we send 2 or 3 students to a cyber charter school, we're not eliminating a teacher. We can't, save any utilities. It'd be nice if we could send them in class sizes, that way, we sent a whole 3rd grade class, so we don't, we can save the money, but it doesn't work that way. So that's what they refer to as stranded costs. And so that the formula kind of adjusts for that so that you can make up some of those losses. It's not a huge makeup, but it's there. And then the other thing is the median household income. So after all that stuff is adjusted, they apply a factor of the median household income. And so they take the median household income, which I think is around $71,200 for us, if I'm not mistaken, and they compare it to the median household income of all the districts in the state. And then that creates a multiplier. So if you have a 1.5 multiplier, that means or a 1 would mean you have the same as the state. So in our situation, our multiplier is moving closer towards 1, under 1, which means, and that makes sense when you look at the poverty numbers that we've had. So that's why we're moving closer to that. Before, we were a little bit further under at 0.84. Now we're at 0.94, 96. So that actually helps us a little bit. Because we were lower than that. So we don't get as much taken off because we were above the state. Special ed cost versus state special ed subsidy. This frosts me every time I look at it. If you look at the green line that goes across, that is the funding we get on the special education formula. It only increases by $50,000 or $75,000 a year. But look at how the costs have increased since 13-14. So our costs are going up. Students identified are increasing. Students have greater needs, but the state is asleep at the wheel on this thing. So it frosts me. It's not acceptable. And when we talk about unfunded mandates, this is a prime example of an unfunded mandate. It's requirements of caseloads, and you'd be able to talk to more about what it is, aids and everything else that are required but aren't funded from the state. So that's a big problem that needs to be addressed at some point.
We just heard that tonight in the academic meeting from Pam Watt. Things that were going up that she has to do now for, but I'm thinking, we have to do this, but we're not gonna get paid for it.
And I would tell you, Pam does a great job. I've had multiple conversations with Pam about how she tries to do things more efficiently, whether it's transportation for a student that we're required to provide or meeting the needs in a creative way. Pam tries to do things a little bit more efficiently. And so I appreciate that a lot, and that's helpful to the district. That number could be a little bit higher if it weren't for some of the work she does to try to keep that lower. Federal revenue, and normally this is uneventful. It's Title I, 2, sometimes 3, and 4. And then there's school-based access, which is for services we provide students. And so normally that's all we have. You can see back before the time of COVID, we had 811,000. Now you can see we got that money from the ESSER funds, and it was up to 3.3 last year. We expect it to be around 2.6, depending on how much of those funds we expend. And then 23, 24, 1.7, and then there'll be a little bit left over in the next fiscal period. So I want to point out with the COVID resources. So there's 2 things you could do with that. You could do like a splash purchase, buy some technology. Mr. Ditmore used that to pay for some student devices and some smart panels, display panels. And then there's salaries that you can offset. And so we chose to offset some salaries as well. We also added a few new positions under those to address students' mental health. And so a lot of, special ed, some of our psychologists, social workers, those types of things, we're paying with those funds. The yellow bar at the bottom are recurring expenditures such as labor tech that our normal budget will have to pick up when the federal dollars go away. So for instance, in 22-23, we're projecting that $1.1 million will be the final number of salaries, technology, and student devices, and other items that we would plan to continue after the money goes away. That was what we clipped with the federal ESSER funds. And then in 23-24, that number is 672,532. So basically in 23-24, that means we picked up another $500,000 of expenses that were covered by grant funds in the year prior. So I just point that out to let you know that that money's going away and we won't have that, and we'll have to absorb those costs back into our budget in the next 2 years. Expenses by function. So we kind of track expenses 2 ways: by function and by object. Function is the department who spent it, basically. So 2,100 is student services, 2,300 is administrative principals, 2,500 is business services. So that's who spent it, not what they spent it on, but who spent it. So if you look over there, obviously the number one is regular education and special education are the two top expenditures that we spend our money on, and rightfully so. And you can see kind of down there what else we spend money on. And I have the Barron dollar bill down further back in the presentation that shows, kind of breaks it down on a $100 bill. Here's the type of expenditure, regardless of who spent it. So salaries are our biggest line item, and benefits there between. So between salary and benefits, you're looking at almost 70% of our budget. So that's that. Another large items down in 800, 900. That's the debt service a lot. Back there, it's about $8.5 million moving forward. Here's the Barron 100. And if you look here, instructional expenses, 58.26% of our budgeted expenditures. Debt service is our second largest kind of category, 12.57%. Transportation's 5.13%. A lot of people don't realize that's such a large line item, but it is. Facilities, maintaining facilities, power, lights, cleaning, 6.97%. Administrative, that would be all the administrators, HR, business office, principals, superintendent, assistant superintendent. That's all that. So that's 7.16%. Extracurricular, which everybody seems to focus on the most, is 2.19% of the total budget. So our smallest line item. Salary and benefits detail. I have this going back to 2012 actually on my spreadsheet. And it's kind of depressing to see how everything's grown, especially on the benefits side. In terms of the actual contribution rate, while it went down to 34% this year, it's been climbing. And I have a slide on that further in the presentation that shows just how much that's been climbing. But if you look at that, we talked about, we made the increases we had to stay competitive on support staff and administrators, and the recent teacher contract just got approved with some higher numbers to address just the competition and the inflationary cost of labor. And so you can see here, starting in 21, 22, moving up through, and then this number, 6.45% higher. So we have the full force of all the increases that we did in this year hitting. Moving forward, it won't be quite a big jump, but moving from 22, 23, kind of the shock of the changes we made into the 23, 24 budget. Also, this is our second year of double-digit increases in healthcare. So we're self-funded and we get what's called a pseudo rate, which is an actuarial calculation of what our expected claims are going to be per person. And so that number has increased double digits for the last 2 years. So I had to reflect that. I'd held off, but I reflected that in the budget this year, that those numbers went up 2 straight years. And again, so we're self-funded. We could have a year of $3.5 million next year in claims, which would be fantastic. But we could also we're exposed up to 6.5 or 6.9 million. So it's kind of a law of averages. You have a couple good years, and then you'll see back here, we had some in the 3s, and then we've been above the 4s ever since 2021. Cyber charter impact. When we talked about this last year, we said, hey, we think this might come back a little bit. We're trying hard to lower this number, and we've tried very hard, and other schools have tried very hard. And what everybody's saying is it's just not happening. Some parents have seen how convenient it is, and maybe it fits their lifestyle a little bit more, or whatever reasons, but it may be our new normal. Use that term, but it might be our new normal. That might be the number we're dealing with now. And you can see back here in 18-19, we were at 650,000 in cyber charter tuition. And in 21-22, we were at 2.336. We're projecting 22-23 a little bit lower, but I'm not sure yet. We have to see what the next round of invoices yield for us. And then I'm proposing somewhere in the middle there, 2.15 for 23-24. But I have no reason to believe right now that that number is going to come back, because I know we've done a ton to try to get as far as, even personal phone calls to every family, trying to kind of talk to them about why they're currently using cyber charter. So I wanted to point that out. I don't think that's coming back down. It might hopefully dip into the ones, but we'll see.
What's their bucket of cyber charter? How many are there that they choose from?
Oh,
That's a big number.
yeah, it just keeps growing. That's the
Yeah.
issue.
We could go in, we could speak all night about cyber charter and probably, and why the system's broken, why the funding system's broken. Again, Mr. McGinn and I were just talking earlier, he was asking for some information about what other schools pay, because every school pays a different tuition rate based on the cost that they have to educate a child. Well, anybody who knows anything about cyber knows that they have one fixed cost. It doesn't cost them any more. And so why are different schools paying different amounts of money for that when it's the same,
Approximately how many students are into that number? Because I know obviously it's going to be a different amount, general ed compared to special ed, that we're going to be paying for cyber charter.
I don't have those numbers right in front of me. I can send them out though. Probably right on the front of,
This basic will have.
we'll get those and send them out. I'll make a note of that.
Ironically, 6 years that I was on the District 3 committee, it was amazing how the big cities of Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Chester, Pittsburgh, more charter schools opened up during basketball season. Basketball season's over, the charter schools disbanded.
It's a good plan if it works. So I talked about PSERS rates a little bit earlier, and all of my other slides, I dropped everything going back to 9-10. Like, you're not seeing other slides that go back beyond maybe 16-17, but this increase is so egregious that you almost have to show it, because it tells a story of the funds we needed to put in place over a period of time to meet the expenditures that increased here. And so you can see back in 9-10, the contribution rate was 4.78%. So for every $100 a staff member, teacher, or administrator earned, $4.78 was sent there. We would get reimbursed for half of that. Everybody talked about that number going up and then coming down like a bell curve. It was just going to be temporary, the increase. So we all tried to set some funds aside to pay for it. Well, it went up and it's not coming down. And so you can see the roller coaster goes up. It did dip below, but they were quick to say, oh, it's just a 1-year reprieve. It's going to go back up again. And you can see it starts back up again. So it's kind of a reset down to 34, but then it starts on its upward trend again. Now, this is just a gross expense. This is what hits our expenditure account. We have a revenue line item that we get roughly 50% of this back. So if you look at 34% is 17% net expense to us per $1 earned. So moving into debt service, and again, here's another story where we were back, and as we were doing some of the construction projects, we began issuing bonds. And what was, a $5.8 million expenditure now creeped up to its peak of 8.5. And that's about where we're going to stay. You can see through 33, 34, we're hanging in there, and then it starts to drop off as we start to pay off the projects.
How many year bonds are they?
15 to 20. They go out. Most of them go out. They go up to 30, 35, 36 out there. So. So I put this out because we climbed the mountain, and this was kind of the way, Peters was supposed to be. Supposed to go up and then come back down, but this is the year over year increase, projected increase in debt service. So once we put that revenue in place for debt service, it's there. It's not going to jump 100,000, 200,000 every year. So we just had to climb the mountain, get there, and then get that funding in place, and then we move year to year without major impacts from debt service. To point out, if we do an athletic project, we won't issue new bonds. So that number will stay where it's at right now. It won't increase unless the wheels really fall off the education system. And then everybody's got a bigger problem than this debt service. But we won't need to issue new bonds. So there'll be no new payments as a result of the athletic project. Inflation impact, and I'm not going to go through all the price of paper like I did before, and drone on about that. Nobody wants to hear that. But I wanted to point out the CPI-U, and I point that out is because a lot of our contracts, transportation contracts, rental agreements reference the CPI-U. In fact, we had used the CPI-U as our payroll range increase in the past and some times. And so when you look at that, you were looking at, look at these numbers, 1.8, 2.1, 2.3 when it really got bad. And then all of a sudden you jump down here, and now we're looking at 3.5 being the lowest, and the most recent February was 6.9% increase over the prior February, which had already increased 7.3 over the February before. So I just point that out to show there's some real numbers showing the increase in just about everything we buy. And I was surprised by a number of things as I looked through each invoice. I couldn't believe what some things were bumped up in as far as cost. And so that's curriculum supplies. It's eventually we're in some energy hedging contracts, but when those expire, I'm hoping energy settles a little bit because we'll have to get into a new contract, hopefully not at a far greater amount. Then this is the forecast model, and I'm not going to get into all the details because there's a summary page there. This is really there for your perusal after the meeting. But basically, I look at 3 years back of actual in the current year and then 4 years forward. We're forecasting. The further out, when you get up 26, 27, 27, 28, you make assumptions and it's not as accurate. But it is good. It's a good exercise to see how current decisions impact future budgets. This is the expense side of it and the surplus deficit down there. You can see we go into a deficit position and then come back into the green in 26, 27, which quite honestly is a little bit better position than I thought we'd be in. I thought we'd be in a little bit worse position than this. And then this is how we use our fund balance. So when we have if we do have a deficit, we need to make that up with our reserves. And so we kind of have a plan. Our plan is to use the unassigned fund balance for small amounts, but then as we get into larger amounts, bumping up the assigned for debt service, because we did assign that to service debt, and we can use it for that purpose. And so I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of those deficits are due to our increased debt load, even though there's other numbers that bumped up as much. So we'll go through the debt service amounts first and then move on from there. Here's the summary page. And again, 350,427 deficit forecasted based on a 3.1% village increase. And in the future years, it dips down to 1.2 million deficit budget and starts to come back up. And again, those are better numbers than I've shown in the recent past and are better than I thought we'd see when we were at this point. Here's the impact of on the forecast model at various millage rate increases. And you can see at 4.1, we get to a 1.2 budgeted surplus in 26-27. We do 0, we're all deficits. 1 gives us all deficits across the board. 2.5 gets us back in the green again in 26-27. And 3.1, which is what this budget is currently calculated at, gets us back into 764,652 at 26-27. So what's next? What's next for me is I'll make budget adjustments as I get new information. If I find out anything from the state, I'll get insurance proposals back for next year. A lot of quotes will come in for cost of next year. When I get that information, I always update the placeholder I put in the budget. So I might have assumed a 6% increase in our commercial insurance rates. Well, if it comes back 2%, that'll be a small win for us. If it comes back larger, then I'll have to make an adjustment. Continue to refine the current year. When we get the May numbers, we'll throw the May numbers in there. And if something changes that we weren't expecting for the good or bad, I'll bring that to the board before the final budget approval and say, hey, we have an issue here. May 15 is our board approval. And at that board meeting, the board will be asked to have a proposed final budget. That proposed final budget needs to be posted for 30 days. And then on June 19th, we'll come back and make a final budget approval. We don't have to stick to what we decide on May 15th. So if you say, hey, we're going to approve a proposed final budget of 3.1%, you can come back and go to 2.1% in June. Just because you approve something in May doesn't mean you have to stick to it. A lot of boards do, but you can move off that and change it. And then there's a bunch of paperwork in the back end that I do. So I guess I'm going to put out there, are there any questions first, and are there any comments, any direction as far as millage rate increases that you want me to look at moving forward?
I just have a question on the one slide for the median average increase, which was like basically $100.
Yeah.
Did you have the Homestead Act built into that, or is that?
That's just a raw number.
Okay.
That will be about to change though. Yeah.
That 2% discount mandated by the state, or can we eliminate that?
We looked at that before, but I can look at it.
We looked at it before and they wouldn't allow us to do that.
But
Yeah. I think it's mandated, but I can certainly check into it. Yeah.
What is that referring to?
So if somebody pays their tax bill in a certain amount of time, they get a discount on their tax bill. And I had shown back there in a couple slides that amounted to $600 and
some $1,000.
some $1,000, $618,000. So
Brian, the changes that I'm hearing tonight, in your opinion, that there's a good opportunity that we do not have to go to the full index. Do you feel comfortable?
I do.
If we would have to take a vote tonight, would you?
Yeah. I feel comfortable that I don't think we have to go to the full 4.1. Now, somewhere between, probably 2.5 to 3.1%. I feel comfortable, even with some of the expenditures we don't know about. You always get a surprise, but we do have reserves put aside. Now, the warning I will give you is you don't want to live on reserves. You wouldn't want to be in a position in your home budget where you're paying your utility bills out of your savings account. You don't have enough money to clear those bills with your regular income. So you wouldn't want to be in that position. We certainly don't want to be there where we're running a $2 million deficit budgeted every year and we're using our surplus funds. Eventually, those surplus funds run out and we have no revenue in place to meet the needs of the increased expenditures. But I feel good that if something happens where we get caught with a one-time surprise next year or something like that, then we have enough reserves in place to be able to pick that off. Also, the fact that even though we're looking at an athletic project, we're not looking at additional debt service. So it's not, with that project, we'll come to put some funds aside for capital reserve to save because eventually turf needs replaced. So if you're not putting some money aside every so often to pay for that turf replacement, you'll get a big surprise in about 10 or 11 years where we'll have to pay for replacement of those facilities with no money set aside in capital reserve. So I do feel comfortable that we could do something less. Also, if you look at the future years, so based on the Independent Fiscal Office, their estimate of the Act 1 index moving forward, it's high. It's 5 next year, then 4.3, then 4. Meaning there's room for us to make adjustment if we find out, hey, we've got some expenditures that keep up that we need to take care of. At that point, we can make that adjustment next year. In a time where the Act 1 index is 2.5%, it's really difficult to make that up in future years, but we're in a position to be able to make that up. So I do have a confidence. And like I said, those numbers are better than I expected us to be at this point. So now would probably be an opportune time if we're going to do it.
I've known that, served on the board, before the board, and as your treasurer, and I'll tell you, you have hit it right on every year. From what your recommendation, you do a lot of work and a lot of good work. As we talk to the people, if we're able to go down and give everybody this 3.1, and that's a big if, but can we go back and do you realize how much we have done in our school district with the elementary schools, the district office, and haven't increased taxes for that other than the lesson index? So I think we have done an awful good job at what we have, and that's just my opinion. I'd like to hear from other people how you feel, or what do you feel about the increase or decrease, because Brian needs to give that information so for the next meeting.
Well, Brian, you answered my questions ahead. I mean, it is what it is there. I mean, I don't like charter school, but that's the kind of stuff you have to put in. And I think you did a great job.
I'm pretty comfortable with 3.1.
Yeah, I mean, typically I would be all for finding ways to reduce taxes, but just don't want to do anything that sets us up down the road that puts us in a bad spot.
Trust me, he'll tell us May 15th if that's the case.
What was the slide before this one? Was that in the packet?
No, it wasn't. That was a late edition. I can provide everybody with a sign to reissue.
Just go back.
You're right. Good catch. That did not make the print time.
So 3.1 in 4 years, right? Am I thinking right? 4 years we would be.
There's a lot of ifs in between there, just saying. So, I mean, somebody run after me in 4 years if that.
There's a big difference between the 310 and 410 compared to going 0% and then having to make that up.
I don't recommend that only because you saw that slide I showed. That when you put the 0 in there, it ends up costing you $1 million down the road. So I don't recommend a 0. Although, we've used a slow and steady wins the race type of approach over the past 10 to 15 years. And I think it's been successful, as Mr. Clare pointed out, 2 elementary schools, a district office, a renovation at the high school. potential athletic project, and we're still not getting exceptions above index. And I think that's really good. It's also speaks about the growth we've had in our district as far as real estate growth and assessed value. So
Pat, do you have any comments?
No, I think we're in good shape, so I don't foresee a 4.1 at all. Right.
I'll get back to you, Bob. Over here, Jen.
Oh, don't ask me.
No, I
Still
think
learning.
presentation is good. We definitely, I don't know exactly what number we'll land on, but we're gonna have to do something because otherwise it'd be
Oh, yeah.
fiscally irresponsible.
24, 25 will probably have tax base from Oak Street and Route Pike, 72 warehouses that they're putting up over Raffo Township. So that'll change that figure somewhat.
Amy, do you have?
And
Just from a real estate
potential-
perspective, just being an agent, I know other school districts are way higher. Us that our taxes aren't. I think, I'm not sure on the number either, but I agree with their benefit.
Bob, in your short time here with us, what are your feelings?
So I would trust what the larger body is saying, but some of the trouble signs that's been identified, we have actions to try to address those. This is what I would be curious about.
yes, although some of those are a larger body that you would have, like, some of those things are statewide levels that may or may not be addressable by us other than yelling at them, begging.
We did adopt a cyber charter resolution 2 board meetings ago. And 90%, over 90% of schools in Lancaster County have done that and across the state. And we're also looking to take some of our special ed programs that are outside of the district and bring them back at either a wash or a savings. So we are looking at some of those bigger picture things. But it's not a magic wand scenario, obviously.
Make of the House and Senate. You don't see any movement on charter schools or real estate tax reform.
Yeah, I mean, there could be some simple changes to the charter school that would make it, they could come back and say, hey, we're going to set a statewide tuition rate for charter based on their actual expense plus what they deem an acceptable markup. That would be a huge win. They had something on the floor a couple of years ago for that, and it went nowhere. They told us it would go nowhere. So there are statewide levels, but like I said, Pam and Tracy and Amy, the principals, I know if you talk to a lot of our principals, they're of the mind that they want to try to save money, that they want to try to do things more cost efficient. I don't think I encounter what I'm going to call a spender in our administration. I mean, people are trying to do things as responsibly as possible. We don't, one of the challenges we have is we don't necessarily have luxurious programs. We're offering, I feel like it's kind of typical of our era. We're offering a solid program, but we don't have a lot of Rolls Royces and Mercedes out there that we can, there's not a ton of low hanging fruit because we do run pretty thin in a lot of our departments as well, as John back here looking at me. We run thin in some of our operational departments and stuff to try to conserve money. So,
And we've hired people like John, and the board has hired people that are fiscally responsible and have the capacity. Like I've shared with all of you about how much our tech department has saved us, even in the building project and things that they've taken on that we're not subcontracting out because John and his people can manage it. So we're always looking for that type of capacity as well with our teams.
Yeah, I'd like to see another high school in Lancaster County that works as hard as our administrators, our teachers. I think they do, with an exception to rules. I really like to see, I really like the what the future was school. I still say when our high school's renovated, we are going to have the nicest school district in Lancaster County.
And Brian, you're right. I think there is a perception out there, me included. I didn't realize that the extracurricular stuff is that low. It's what you see out there.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a lot more than that.
And that's high. We used to be around 1-1.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher, but it's funny because for the longest time, I fielded more questions about financial information regarding athletics than almost any other thing. And there's so many other glaring big ticket items on this budget that somebody could, ask about and get more detail on. But it was always, a fall play or something like that,
Anybody else? Dr. Axe, Dr. Flannery?
I just want to commend Brian on the effort. We've met a multitude of times about this, and he reviewed everything with me again today. And I appreciate not only the effort, but also the education that he gives me as far as explaining it in a way that I'm comfortable with and can learn from.
That to work.
Anybody have anything else? Next meeting is May 15th. Have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Judy,